higher education committee where most of them will be nominated members, with only two of them coming in. And we know the sort of political appointments that have happened in the institutions of higher education, research bodies and universities, etc. in the country in the last few years. So the dangerous part of this is if any institution does not comply with the recommendations of this HECI, Higher Education Council of India, and that is where I apprehend dangers will come, well, both of us will have to fight together. If you do not accept or do not comply with the directions given by them, either regarding funding or the course content, then the non-compliance will be treated as a criminal offense. So that is the intimidation. That you are a criminal not to follow the directions of the HECI. And this is where the academic control over higher education will be replaced by political control. And this Higher Education Council of India will function under an advisory body which will be set up by the Minister of Human Resource Development. He will be chairing it and there will be his nominees. So now the picture is clear on how this political control has to be done. Now this, in addition to the appointments of deans, vice chancellors, etc., this HECI will recommend. Not only the vice chancellors, not only the heads of the research institutions, like historical research, like your Archaeological Survey of India, like the archives of India, but also the deans in the universities and colleges, and the principals of colleges, go down to the level of +2. All this will be covered under this HECI. So this is the second of the challenges that are there. The third, the challenge that, in my opinion, is concerning the changes that are being made to the social composition of students. Now I know social composition of students is a very tricky issue for minorities institutions also, because the legal cases have been taken up on the question of reservations on minority institutions, whether they're mandatory or not. And the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of the minority institutions that no, it's not mandatory except when they are taking large-scale funding of the Government of India. Otherwise, both in the teaching staff and in the students, it's not mandatory, but if you're taking the fund. But I'll come to that point again in the current context, what my humble suggestion would be to all of you. But the social composition of the students is important, and how is that being affected? In two ways, or let's say maybe more than two ways, but in two definite ways. One, the intake into the universities, central universities and the governmental universities, that intake of students is being reduced. In JNU, for instance, in order to prevent the JNU is producing only left-oriented students, and it's bastion of left ideology. So the easiest way was one to try and attack the university through their, or politically through their organization. That all happened, all of you know. And then the other method was to reduce the number of students going in. And this they have reduced. Now the Supreme Court has said that no, restore back is a waste of national talent. You'll have to restore back the intake. I mean, that ruling has just come from the Supreme Court, which is good. But the idea was what? By restricting the intake into these universities, you will restrict the growth of opposition to the ideas that they want to impose and change our country, or transform our country from a secular democratic republic into their Hindu Rashtra concept. Now, this has two meanings. The second aspect, before I come to the meanings, the second way in which this restriction of students is being done is through privatization. Privatization means fees exorbitant according to your privatization, what you're privatizing. No, this is not only private educational institutions. These are not only private universities. These are private courses within government universities also. You have self-funded courses. Computer technology. Central University has what is called as self-financed courses, or self-funded or self-financed courses. There the fees are different. So restricting education only to those who have the means to buy this education is in a way restricting the intake of students into the higher education. Now, and any private institution, reservations are not applicable. It's a big struggle we are fighting, saying that that should extend to the private institutions. But it's not applicable, and also for the private self-financed courses in the university. So this reservation depriving the Dalits, the our STs and the OBCs. Now this leads to what? I can tell you with my experience as a student leader and in JNU. When we created this new admissions policy, and many do not realize that this was the product of the fight against emergency and the product of the students' movement, and we had to take a big struggle to take on the teaching community with us in creating this admissions policy, which actually threw open the doors from being an elitist university into an all India university. And it also threw open the doors, instead of being only those who could afford to come for higher education, to those who do not normally have access to higher education. My greatest gratification in life has been so many of my juniors who came from Bihar, Orissa, UP, who could never speak one sentence in English properly. They are now, or they have now retired actually, we're all getting old, but they have now retired. They have now retired as IAS officers, IFS officers, IPS officers who served our country well during all this period. They would come and say, comrade, but for this admissions policy that you had, none of us, even though we may have money, we may be from a landlord family, but none of us would have risen to that sort of a situation but for the training you gave us in JNU. And this was the integration that brought together. And when they come, what do they bring? The Dalit brings an awareness of why this sort of a situation exists, of why this oppression continues to him. They seek to sanitize the academic discourse, to try and say, what is this social oppression? What is this discrimination based on caste? If you remove the SC, ST and the OBCs and the minorities from the mainstream of the student's body, this academic discussion never will get sanitized. And that is exactly what those who want to change the character of our education systems to suit their political objective. So therefore, this is also important to strengthen the transition from the study of history into study of mythology, Hindu mythology, study of philosophy into study of Hindu theology. Now this also helps to allow prejudice to become the substitute for science. Prejudice, and what I say is my opinion, that is the substitute, or in fact superior. As Lucas pointed out, irrationality becomes superior to rationality, and this is what facilitates it. So when this attacks, my humble suggestion to all of you would be to seriously consider. Though reservations is not mandatory according to the Supreme Court also in the minority institutions, but as a gesture that you are doing it yourself without any mandatory consideration. The Dalit Christians that we have, for whom we are fighting, that they must be included in the Dalits for reservations. Access to them. Many institutions, many Christian missionary institutions, educational institutions I know, and I have been associated, have this conscious policy. They have a certain section that are doing it very good. And that is, let me tell you, being widely appreciated in the country, that even without the compulsions of law, these institutions are undertaking this sort of a inclusion, a social inclusion. Now this is something that maybe must be strengthened, and I'm sure you will give proper thought to it. And the fourth way in which these attacks are coming is in the process of not only privatization that we spoke of earlier, but actually the commodification of education. Education itself is a commodity. The student, therefore, is also a commodity. What commodity does is that it has to have an exchange value. Otherwise, a commodity production is useless. So what you are producing is not is not actually intellectuals, but what you're producing is skilled workers. And this has a very, very dangerous, a dangerous potential. First of all, commodification of education makes education more exclusionary than universal, because only those who have the money can afford education. The argument now put forward by the government is that all private institutions, therefore, you must attack, saying that they are commodifying education. We said no. There are institutions which are set up by philanthropic charities. There are institutions set up by the missionaries who have been doing work here for more than 2 centuries now. They may be private, but these are not mercenary, commodification of actually extorting high fees. There are universities like Stanford, Columbia, Harvard in the USA, which are set up by philanthropical trusts. In fact, Baba Sahib Ambedkar went on a scholarship to Columbia to do his doctorate in law, where they do a huge amount of cross-subsidy. If you have a rich parents who can afford it, they collect money from you, but those who don't have, through scholarship, they are taught. It happened with me in school, it happened with, not with me in the sense, but it happened in my time at school, it happened in my time in college, it continues to happen with all missionary colleges. So they cannot be equated. But the question is, even there, the fees are not as exorbitant as you find in these private universities today, or the private professional colleges. Then the government's argument is what? Why are you bothered about fees? The government is giving education loans, so students can take the loans, pay the fees, and then they can repay when they get a job. But the reality is there is no job. So there is no way that these people are repaying. In the last 5 years, the number of mothers who come to me and fathers saying, "Sir, we have taken," in the parliament, he's saying, "Please take it up. We've taken these loans, they trained their children to be pilots, so the airline pilots. There was a slump, and because of the high oil prices, the airline stopped recruiting. And training as a pilot is a huge amount of money. And now they've been trained, no jobs, they don't know how to return, suicides. Farmers commit suicide because they are in a debt trap. Students and parents of students who have taken these loans, unable to pay back because there are no jobs, are committing suicides. So the point is, none of these actually is the solution for creating, let's say, a new India that we are talking about. Because this commodification is anti-democratic, it is socially regressive, and students themselves become a commodity. So what does happen? What is happening in India today? You have skilled manpower being produced for the needs of capital to generate more profit. You have not intellectuals, but this skilled power, which has no other option, but you have this brain drain. You saw in the papers yesterday, over 50,000 Indians have been given the citizenship in the USA, even after Trump has come last year. It's cheaper for the USA to employ our children, much, much cheaper. So we give them training, they take them and get profits out of them. They're not used for India's development. And this is where the irony I want to, towards the end I just wanted to talk about this, that whenever Stanford University had invited me 2 years in a row to come and lecture to their students, I kept wondering who is more courageous, whether Stanford University to invite a communist or a communist to accept their invitation and go there. So I was wondering who was going later. But anyway, when I went there, next door is the Silicon Valley. And in the Silicon Valley, since you were there, so when you went there, I was very surprised for the first year when I went there that the second language, according to the US authorities, in the Silicon Valley that year was Telugu, my mother tongue. I was very proud. Then they said, community keeps changing, sometimes it becomes Tamil, sometimes Malayalam, sometimes Gujarati. It all depends on how many people come in. I said, why is this happening? He said, bulk of the people who are actually in the forefront of path-breaking frontier technologies in the information technology sector are all Indian youth. The manager of Google, the manager of your Amazon, the manager of your Apple. I mean, you all go there, they suddenly started talking to me in Telugu. I said, what are you? I didn't know that there were so many. If today information technology, which is the foundation for artificial intelligence and the robotics that is happening, robots replacing actual labor and creating greater unemployment, but they create greater profits, so it's going to happen. This information technology, the leadership being provided for the frontier technologies to advance is by our Indian youth. And this is happening when? When the government says there are 30 out of 100 that are going to higher education today, and our calculation says not more than 18 and even 20 if you put it. That is 1/5 of our youth who are eligible to enter higher education today only enter. 4/5 cannot. If with that 1/5 we are able to dominate the world's knowledge society and its advances like we are dominating today in Silicon Valley, just imagine if we really give our youth the education, a quality health and an employment opportunity, nobody can stop India from being the world's leader of knowledge society, and we have that potential in us. The point is to realize that potential rather than get divided and destroy ourselves to fratricidal conflicts and wars where you want to impose one type of uniformity in this country over its diversity. And there's no dearth of resources, mind you. If you today just calculate the amount that has gone into the loans taken, corporate loans taken from our nationalized banks, 11.5 lakh crores of rupees, or the Rafael scam, or the various other things in which you legalized political corruption by these electoral bonds, so nobody knows who's bought the bonds, which party they've been given to, and which party has taken the money. There's no trial that will be left. If even 1/2 of that money is recovered for India's, for our people's future, and if that were invested in your public investments, build our infrastructure, build our education, social infrastructure, then this youth today that are wandering aimlessly will find a better health, better education and a better job, and they will create a better India. So education is a key vital area that needs to be attended to, and that is where I think the vision of education that needs to be restored is the vision with which we began soon after independence. And that is where I would like to end by quoting Jawaharlal Nehru. Soon after independence, 1948, at the convocation of the Allahabad University, this is what Nehru says, quote, "A university stands for humanism, for tolerance, for reason, for the adventure of ideas, and for the search of truth. It stands for the onward march of human race towards even higher objectives. If the university discharges its duties adequately, then it is well with the people and the nation." Unquote. What we are seeing today is the exact opposite of this. So this is a struggle that we will engage ourselves in, as my party will, as the CPI, we already are, we will. You can count on us to stand up to your rights as minority institutions, to your rights as educationists, and your rights as shaping the consciousness of the young in our country. And whenever they say that they take you into your schools and colleges and indoctrinate you towards Christianity, I said I spent 11 years in school in a missionary school. I spent 3 years in college, in a missionary college, and not once did I have even the urge to consider, though we had moral science things, and we would question what are the things, everything else. And never, I mean, these things don't happen through such methods that these people are talking of. I said, take any one of you. And in the parliament, once I asked, tell me how many of you actually went to your missionary schools and colleges. there was a very uncomfortable silence because many of them did, but they don't want to admit now that they also, I mean, they came out from there. So this sort of a situation, I said, only thing I learned, and I said this in Parliament as well, only thing I learned was what Shakespeare said in the Hamlet, and Polonius' advice to his son. There are lots of things. We just read that wonderful passage. I mean, you remember that story of a grandmother who was taken to see a Shakespearean play by the grandson. And theatre, you know, in England is very, very expensive, particularly Shakespeare theatre. So grandson saved up all the money, took the grandmother, and after the play, he came out, when coming out, he said, "Grandma, how was the play?" He said, "Play is fine, son, but it was too full of quotations." So Shakespeare is that, you know. But that passage of Polonius, if you take, every single one line is virtually a quotation that we have used it in some other context. But he ends it with what? He said, "Above all, my son, be true to thine own self. Then it shall follow like the night the day, that thou shalt do no harm to no man." Be true to thine own self, and it shall follow like the night the day, that thou shalt do no harm to no man. Now, this is the sort of humanism that all of us have learned through this education system. And that is the strength of character. And I would once again salute you for creating that sense of character to hundreds of thousands of students all over annually. Please continue to do your commendable job, and please be assured that forces like us, however strong we may be, however weak may we be, however small or however big, we are there to protect India as we know of it today. That is the idea of India. That is India as a pluralistic society that we are all proud of, that there cannot be such plurality in any other country in the world today, and which is our strength. Confluences, civilizational confluences has what made it India, and civilizational confluences continue to make what it is India. It is not merely historical accident that you will have the first mosque, the first church, the first synagogue in India in what is today the state of Kerala. That is, this confluences, civilizational confluences, meeting grounds, that is what created what we are today. And we need to celebrate this diversity. But that means to defeat this insularity that is today dominating, seeking to dominate our education system. And in that, my entire solidarity of ours with all of you and with the people of our country. So thank you for allowing me to share some of my thoughts with all of you and to give me this opportunity. Thank you once again. Namaskar.